Tomiwa had never been this excited in her life. Her wedding day was fast approaching, and in just 4 short days, she was going to marry the man of her dreams, Ugo. Every detail of the wedding had been carefully planned, and as the days drew closer, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of starting a new chapter of her life with him. She had always dreamed of a fairy tale romance, and it seemed as though everything was falling perfectly into place. Ugo was everything she had ever wanted in a partner: caring, handsome, ambitious, and always there for her. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like the luckiest woman alive. The only thing that she wasn't ready for was the big surprise that Ugo had promised her on their wedding day. He had been working hard on something special, something that would wow her at the ceremony. "Babe, I'm so excited for our wedding. You're going to be the best husband ever," Tomiwa would tell him, her voice full of anticipation. "I can't wait to see what you've been working on. I just know I'm going to love it." Ugo would laugh, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. He had been tight-lipped about the surprise, not wanting to spoil it for her. However, he had promised that it would be something unforgettable. And though Tomiwa couldn't wait to see it, a small part of her felt a little anxious. She had no idea what Ugo had planned, and that made her both excited and a little nervous. The day before the wedding, as Tomiwa sat at her vanity mirror, she couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and yet something felt slightly off. She brushed the feeling away, attributing it to the stress of planning the wedding. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something wasn't right. Ugo had been unusually distant the past few weeks. While he had always been busy with work, lately, he seemed preoccupied with something else. There were times when Tomiwa would catch him sneaking off to make secretive phone calls or disappearing into his study for hours on end. When she asked him about it, he would always assure her that everything was fine, that he was just working on a surprise for their big day. Yet Tomiwa couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't share more with her. Why all the secrecy? Shouldn't this be a time when they should be working together to make their wedding day perfect? It wasn't that she didn't trust him, she did, but there was a feeling deep in her gut that made her question everything. Was he hiding something from her? And if so, what could it possibly be? Despite her doubts, Tomiwa pushed them aside, convincing herself that it was just wedding jitters. After all, she loved Ugo more than anything, and he had never given her a reason to doubt his love for her. On the morning of their wedding, everything seemed to fall into place. The flowers were perfect, the venue was beautifully decorated, and the guests were starting to arrive. Tomiwa couldn't contain her excitement as she slipped into her wedding dress, her heart racing with anticipation. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, helping her with the final touches. The air was filled with laughter and chatter, but Tomiwa's mind kept wandering back to Ugo. What was his surprise? What had he been working on so hard? Would it live up to her expectations? "I'm sure whatever is planned is going to be amazing," one of her bridesmaids said, sensing Tomiwa's nervousness. Tomiwa smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She was excited, yes, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't ignore. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Meanwhile, Ugo was in a different part of the venue, making sure everything was in place. He had spent the last few weeks preparing for this day, and it had all led up to this moment. His surprise was almost ready, and he couldn't wait to see Tomiwa's reaction. However, there was something troubling him as well. The past few weeks had been filled with rehearsals, planning, and secrecy. But there had been moments with Zainab that made him question whether he was doing the right thing. Zainab, his dance instructor, had become more than just a teacher. Every time they met for practice, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. Ugo had always prided himself on being loyal to Tomiwa, but lately he couldn't deny that his feelings for Zainab were growing stronger. He had promised Tomiwa that their wedding day would be magical, that he would surprise her in a way she'd never forget. And yet, as he stared at the mirror, adjusting his tuxedo, he couldn't shake the guilt creeping in. Was he really ready for this commitment? Did he love Tomiwa enough to spend the rest of his life with her? Knowing what he felt for Zainab, Ugo pushed the thought aside. He had promised Tomiwa, and no matter what, he would follow through. As the ceremony began, Tomiwa walked down the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. Ugo's eyes locked on hers, and for a brief moment, she forgot about everything else. In that moment, it was just the two of them and the love they shared. But even as they exchanged vows, Tomiwa's mind drifted again, the feeling of unease still gnawing at her. After the ceremony, as the couple prepared for their reception, Ugo quickly slipped away to meet with Zainab. The two exchanged a few quiet words, their eyes filled with a mix of guilt and longing. Zainab had become more than just a dance teacher in Ugo's life. She was someone he felt he couldn't live without. But he knew that if Tomiwa ever found out, everything would be ruined. As Ugo and Zainab talked, Tomiwa was left behind, smiling for the cameras but feeling a growing sense of dread. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And as the night wore on, that feeling only intensified. She would soon discover the truth, but little did she know, the surprise Ugo had been preparing for her wasn't one that would bring her joy, but heartbreak. The night wore on, and as the reception continued, Tomiwa smiled for the cameras, greeting her guests and making polite conversation. She had worked so hard for this day, and she couldn't let the little nagging feelings ruin it. But deep down, the unease lingered. Ugo was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared after the ceremony and hadn't returned. Her mind raced with worry. Where could he be? Why hadn't he come back? There were moments during the reception when she could feel eyes on her, people watching her every move. She plastered on a smile, but inside, she was filled with an uncertain mix of confusion and anxiety. She excused herself from her guests, her heels clicking against the marble floor, as she made her way to the quiet hallway. The wedding planner, Olamide, was standing there, looking concerned. Is everything all right, Tomiwa? Olamide asked, her eyes scanning Tomiwa's face. Tomiwa tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, everything's fine. It's just that Ugo's been gone for a while, and I'm starting to worry. Olamide frowned. He hasn't been around much today, has he? I mean, I understand he's been busy with the surprise he's planning, but he should be here, especially for the reception. This is your big day after all. Tomiwa nodded, trying to ignore the tightening feeling in her chest. I know. I'm sure he's just caught up with the surprise. He's been so secretive about it. But the words didn't sit well with her. She had never felt so alone, surrounded by people, yet yearning for Ugo's presence. Where was he? What was going on? She excused herself again and went to search for him. Minutes turned into an hour, and still there was no sign of Ugo. The tension in Tomiwa's body grew with each passing moment. It was as if the world was closing in on her, and her once perfect wedding day was slipping through her fingers. The thought of the surprise seemed so far away now, replaced by the overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Tomiwa found him, but not where she had expected. She walked down the corridor to a small private meeting room, where she noticed two figures standing close to each other. At first, she didn't recognize them, but then, as her eyes focused, she saw Ugo and Zainab, his dance instructor, standing there in quiet conversation. Her heart sank as she watched them. They were too close, their body language far too intimate for someone who was supposed to be a mere dance instructor. Zainab had her hand resting on Ugo's shoulder, and there was a look in his eyes, something Tomiwa had never seen before. It was a look that was full of longing, a look that told her everything she feared but didn't want to admit. Tomiwa felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she backed away, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. The beautiful dream she had for her wedding day, turning into a painful nightmare. Why hadn't Ugo told her about Zainab? Why hadn't he been honest with her? And why had he been sneaking around, hiding the truth from her? She stood there for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. She could hear the faint sound of their conversation in the distance, but she couldn't bring herself to listen. She didn't need to hear anything more. She had seen enough. Her legs felt weak as she turned and made her way back to the reception hall. The once vibrant colors of the decorations now seemed dull, the laughter and chatter of the guests nothing more than a blur. Tomiwa felt numb, like she was floating above it all, completely detached from the world around her. She forced herself to keep walking, pushing through the crowd to the restroom. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and leaned against the cold marble counter, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She couldn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from holding back tears she refused to let fall. How could this happen? How could Ugo do this to her? They were about to spend the rest of their lives together, and now it seemed like everything they had built was a lie. The door to the restroom opened, and her bridesmaid, Ifeoma, stepped inside, her face full of concern. Tomiwa, what's going on? You've been gone for a while, Ifeoma said, her voice laced with worry. Are you okay? Tomiwa blinked, trying to fight the overwhelming sadness that threatened to consume her. She swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I just need a moment, Ifeoma. I'll be fine. But Ifeoma wasn't convinced. She stepped closer and placed a hand on Tomiwa's shoulder. You don't look fine. What happened? Talk to me. Tomiwa shook her head, her breath shaky. I saw something. I don't know what to think anymore. I saw Ugo with Zainab. They were too close. It didn't feel right. Ifeoma's expression softened with understanding. Oh, Tomiwa, I know this must be hard, but maybe there's an explanation. Maybe it's nothing. Tomiwa shook her head again, this time with more conviction. No, Ifeoma. I saw it in his eyes. It wasn't nothing. I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I've been lied to. Everything I thought I knew about Ugo, it's all falling apart. Ifeoma's face fell as she tried to comfort her friend. I'm so sorry, Tomiwa, but you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. But you need to confront him. Don't let this feeling fester. Tomiwa nodded, though her heart was still heavy. She knew deep down that Ifeoma was right. She had to face Ugo, had to confront him about what she had seen. But a part of her was terrified. What if he denied it? What if he didn't feel the same way? What if everything she thought she knew about him was a lie? Tomiwa's mind raced as she stood in the restroom, trying to collect her thoughts. Her emotions were all over the place. Confusion, anger, hurt. She couldn't stop replaying the image of Ugo and Zainab together, standing too close, whispering in a way that seemed too intimate for comfort. It was as if everything she had believed in had been ripped apart in an instant. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Her reflection in the mirror seemed distant, a stranger looking back at her. This wasn't how she had envisioned a wedding day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now it felt like her world was crashing down around her. Ifeoma's voice broke through her thoughts. Tomiwa, I'm really sorry, but I think you need to talk to Ugo. You need answers, even if it's hard. Otherwise, you won't find peace. Tomiwa nodded, wiping the tears that had begun to well up in her eyes. She had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. But now, in this moment, she felt vulnerable. This was the man she was about to marry, the one she had trusted with her heart. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had betrayed her. I just don't know where to start. How do I even approach him after what I saw? She asked, her voice shaky. Ifeoma gave her a sympathetic look. You have to be honest with him, Tomiwa. Tell him what you saw. Don't hold back. You deserve the truth. Tomiwa took another deep breath and nodded again. She knew that confronting Ugo wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way she could move forward. She couldn't live in this state of uncertainty, waiting for the truth to come out on its own. She had to take control of the situation. With newfound determination, she walked out of the restroom and headed straight for the main hall. Her steps were purposeful, though her heart was heavy with fear and uncertainty. Her mind replayed everything she had seen. The closeness between Ugo and Zainab, the way Ugo had looked at her. The whole situation didn't sit right, and Tomiwa knew that she couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. The moment she stepped into the main hall, she saw Ugo across the room, standing near the bar with a drink in his hand. He was talking to some guests, but his eyes met hers for a brief second. His expression was unreadable, and Tomiwa felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. How dare he act like everything was normal? How dare he pretend that nothing was wrong? She walked towards him, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, Ugo turned towards her, a smile spreading across his face. Tomiwa, there you are. I've been looking for you. Tomiwa didn't smile back. She couldn't bring herself to. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest, her gaze hardening. We need to talk. Ugo raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her tone. Talk? About what? About you and Zainab, Tomiwa said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. I saw you with her earlier. Ugo, don't try to deny it. For a moment, Ugo looked at her in confusion, as if trying to make sense of what she had just said. Then his face tightened, and he took a deep breath. Tomiwa, it's not what you think. Tomiwa's anger fled. Not what I think. I saw you with her, Ugo. You were too close. There's no denying it. I was just talking to her, all right? Ugo's voice wavered, and Tomiwa could tell that he was struggling to keep his composure. We were discussing the surprise for you. It's nothing. I swear. Tomiwa felt a bitter laugh bubble in her throat. A surprise? That's what you're going with? I saw how you were looking at her. Don't insult my intelligence, Ugo. Ugo shifted uneasily, running a hand through his hair. Tomiwa, please, just trust me. You've got it all wrong. There's nothing going on between us. Tomiwa's heart hurt as she stared at him. She had trusted him with everything. Her heart, her future, her love. But now standing before her was a man who couldn't even be honest with her. The betrayal cut deep. No, Ugo. I trusted you and you've lied to me. I saw what I saw, and I'm not going to stand here and let you pretend like nothing's wrong, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Ugo reached out to touch her arm, but Tomiwa pulled away sharply. Don't touch me, she snapped, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm done. Ugo's expression faltered, and for the first time he seemed truly remorseful. Tomiwa, please don't leave like this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I never wanted to hurt you. But Tomiwa wasn't listening. She couldn't listen to his apologies, not when they felt so hollow. She had already made up her mind. The man she had trusted with her life, her future, was not the man she thought he was. I'm done, Ugo, she repeated, her voice stronger this time. The wedding is off. I can't marry someone who doesn't respect me enough to be honest. With those final words, she turned on her heels and walked away, her heart shattering with every step. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to get away from Ugo, away from the wedding that had turned into a nightmare. The weight of the betrayal felt unbearable, but she knew deep down that she had made the right decision. She couldn't marry a man who had deceived her. As she walked out of the venue, the cold night air hit her, and for the first time in hours, she could breathe. She was free, but the pain of what had just happened was almost too much to bear. Tomiwa's legs felt like they were made of lead as she stepped away from the wedding venue. The city streets outside felt oddly quiet, as if the world had come to a standstill. She didn't know where she was walking to, but the rhythmic pounding of her heart was the only sound that filled her ears. The cold air bit at her skin, but it did nothing to numb the pain that gripped her chest. The moment she left Ugo behind, she felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. The betrayal she had just witnessed was so fresh, so raw, that it seemed impossible to process. She had put her entire trust in him. He was supposed to be her forever, the one person she could count on. And now everything she thought they shared felt like a lie. Her mind raced as she walked aimlessly down the street. She could feel the tears building up behind her eyes, but she fought them off. She wouldn't cry over him. She couldn't. Not when she had just found the strength to leave him. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Her wedding day, the day that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, was now over, and it was a day she would never forget for all the wrong reasons. She was supposed to be walking down the aisle to start a new chapter with Ugo, but instead, she was running away from him, fleeing from the man who had stolen her trust. She couldn't stop thinking about Zainab. Her mind kept returning to the image of Ugo and Zainab together. The closeness, the chemistry, it wasn't just a professional relationship. No, there was something deeper, something more intimate between them. And now it made sense. All the moments Ugo had been distant, all the secrecy, it had all been leading up to this. She stopped in her tracks, her chest tightening as a wave of anger washed over her. How dare he do this to her? How dare he lie to her all while promising her the world? They were supposed to be building a life together, and instead, Ugo had chosen someone else. It felt like a slap in the face, and Tomiwa wasn't sure how she was going to move past this. Her phone buzzed in her bag, pulling her out of her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment before pulling it out. It was a message from Ifeoma. "I'm so sorry, Tomiwa. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you. Please talk to me." Tomiwa stared at the message for a moment, her heart swelling with appreciation for her friend. She quickly typed back a response. "I'm fine, Ifeoma. I just need some time, but thank you. You've been my rock through all of this." She hit send and tucked the phone back into her bag, feeling a little bit of comfort in knowing that at least one person had her back. But even then, the ache in her chest remained, a constant reminder that the man she had loved had betrayed her. As Tomiwa continued to walk, her thoughts drifted to the future. She had always pictured herself married to Ugo, building a family, growing old together. But now that future seemed impossible. She had to let go of that dream. She had to let go of Ugo. A thought crossed her mind. How would I ever get through this? But Tomiwa wasn't a person who liked to wallow in self-pity. She had always been strong, independent, and determined. She couldn't let this one man define her. She couldn't let Ugo's betrayal ruin her. She deserved better. She was better than this. Suddenly, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Tomiwa!" She turned quickly, startled, and found herself face to face with Ifeoma, who was panting from running to catch up with her. "I thought I lost you," Ifeoma said breathlessly. "I was worried." "Where are you going? You don't need to go through this alone." Tomiwa stood frozen for a moment. The weight of the night seemed to have come crashing down on her, and for the first time since she left the venue, she felt a tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but Ifeoma stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Tomiwa in a tight hug. "It's okay, Tomiwa. It's okay to cry. You don't have to carry this on your own," Ifeoma said softly. Tomiwa clung to her friend for a moment, allowing herself to break down. The dam had finally burst. She had tried so hard to keep it together, but the grief and heartbreak were too much to bear. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking with the release of emotion. Ifeoma didn't say a word, simply holding her and letting her cry it out. When Tomiwa finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, Ifeoma gave her a gentle smile. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe," Ifeoma said. "You don't need to be out here alone. You deserve more than this. Let me take care of you for a change." Tomiwa nodded silently, too exhausted to argue. The thought of going back to her apartment or even staying at the wedding venue seemed unbearable. She needed space. She needed time to think. Ifeoma led Tomiwa to her car and they drove to her place. The silence between them comfortable but heavy. Tomiwa's mind was a blur of emotions, but at least she was no longer alone. She was grateful for Ifeoma's presence, but even as they drove, a part of her still felt like her heart was being torn into pieces. When they arrived at Ifeoma's apartment, Tomiwa sank into the couch, her body aching from the emotional toll the night had taken. Ifeoma made her a cup of tea, and they sat together in silence for a while. The soothing warmth of the tea helped calm her nerves, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. I should have seen it, Tomiwa said quietly, staring into her cup. I should have known something was wrong with Ugo. All the secrecy, all the lies, I let him get away with it. Ifeoma shook her head. You trusted him, Tomiwa. You believed in him. That's not your fault. You couldn't have known what he was hiding. Tomiwa's voice faltered as she spoke. I loved him. I really thought he was the one. I thought I was making the right choice by marrying him. You were, Tomiwa. You loved him. But now it's time to heal. You can't keep holding on to someone who doesn't value you. You deserve someone who will cherish you. Someone who will never lie to you. Tomiwa looked up at Ifeoma, grateful for her words of comfort. But deep down, the pain was still there, lingering like a shadow over her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep looking back at the past. She had to find a way to move on, for herself. The days after the wedding were a blur for Tomiwa. She spent them in a haze of confusion, pain, and disbelief. It felt like the world had shifted beneath her feet, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find solid ground. The man she had loved, the man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And now she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. Ifeoma had been her rock during this difficult time, offering unwavering support and encouragement. Tomiwa couldn't have made it through the past week without her. Her friend had been there every step of the way, whether it was listening to her vent, offering a shoulder to cry on, or even helping her pack up her things from the apartment she had shared with Ugo. It was a painful process, but with Ifeoma by her side, Tomiwa felt a little less alone. One afternoon, as she sat in Ifeoma's living room, staring blankly at the TV that she hadn't even turned on, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Ugo's name on the screen. At first, she didn't know what to do. She hadn't spoken to him since the night of the wedding, and the thought of hearing his voice again made her stomach churn. But after a moment's hesitation, she decided to answer. Hello, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomiwa, please, can we talk? Ugo's voice was soft, almost pleading. I know you're upset, but I need to explain myself. Tomiwa's heart raced and her fingers tightened around her phone. Part of her wanted to hang up right there, to end the conversation before it even started. But another part of her, the part that had once loved him so deeply, wanted to hear what he had to say. Maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation. I don't know if there's anything you can say that will change my mind, Ugo, Tomiwa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. You've already lied to me. You've already betrayed me. What more is there to explain? Tomiwa, please, just hear me out, he begged. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, and I was just confused. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know the truth. Tomiwa took a deep breath, feeling her emotions bubbling up again. I don't know if I can handle hearing your truth, Ugo. After everything, I'm not sure I even care about what you have to say. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tomiwa could almost hear Ugo trying to gather his thoughts. Tomiwa, I was wrong. I should have never let things go as far as they did with Zainab. Ugo admitted, his voice heavy with regret. But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. I made a mistake, a huge one, and I don't know how to make it right. I can't change what happened, but I can promise you this. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Tomiwa's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to his words. Part of her wanted to believe him. She had loved him for so long, and hearing the sincerity in his voice stirred something deep inside her. But the other part of her, the part that had been betrayed and lied to, wasn't sure she could ever forgive him. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Ugo, Tomiwa said softly. You've hurt me in ways I never thought possible. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? I never wanted to hurt you, Tomiwa. Ugo replied, his voice breaking. I've been selfish, and I've made a mess of everything. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to work on earning your trust. I don't want to lose you. Tomiwa closed her eyes, a flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She thought about the love they had shared, the plans they had made for their future. She had envisioned a life with Ugo, one full of happiness, trust, and love. But now, that future seems so distant, so impossible. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way, Ugo, she said quietly. I need time to figure out what I want, and I can't promise anything right now. I don't even know what the future holds for me. I understand, Ugo said softly. I'll give you all the time you need. But please, don't close the door on us completely. I want to make things right. Tomiwa felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She had once believed in their love so fiercely, but now it felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of what to do next. Could she really go back to him after everything? Could she rebuild the trust that had been shattered? I think about it, Ugo, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But for now, I need to be on my own. I need to heal. I don't know what the future holds, but I need time to figure that out. I understand, Ugo replied, his voice tinged with regret. Take all the time you need, Tomiwa. I'll be here when you're ready. As she ended the call, Tomiwa felt a sense of finality settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She needed to move on, to focus on herself, to heal from the hurt that Ugo had caused. The days that followed were difficult, but Tomiwa knew that she was strong enough to get through this. She focused on herself, on her own well-being, and surrounded herself with people who truly cared for her. Slowly but surely, the pieces of her broken heart began to come together. As the months passed, Tomiwa found herself growing stronger. She didn't know if she would ever fully heal from the pain Ugo had caused, but she knew that she had to let go of the past and embrace the future. It wasn't easy, but with time she found peace within herself. One day, as she walked down the street, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe someday I'll find love again, but for now, I need to love myself first. And with that, Tomiwa stepped forward into her future, no longer looking back at the past, but embracing the journey ahead.